Hey everyone, my name is Cynthia and I help people just like you increase your financial IQ and help you on your path to financial security. So, how are you going to buy your first rental property? Today I'm going to share with you 5 ways how you can buy your very first rental property. And stick around to the end of this video where I share one big tip on how I was able to buy my very first rental property. All right, so let's get to it. So, number 1, you need a down payment. Now, in Ontario and likely in Canada, but it could be different, so I'm speaking for Ontario, you need a 20% down payment, which means if you buy a $500,000 house, you're going to need to come up with $100,000, which is 20% of the 500. So therefore you'd have a mortgage amount of 400 and you'd be putting down the $100,000. Now, where are you going to get that money from? Well, some people will use their savings and other people will use, typically what people will use to buy their first rental property, they will use the equity that they have in their primary residence. So let's say that you've got a house and you've paid down quite a bit of your house. You can borrow money against your primary residence. So it's taking out the equity from your primary residence and using it to purchase the rental property. Now, you do need to disclose that to your lender that that's what you're doing, because they're going to ask you, where is your source of down payment? So either it's your savings account or investments that you have, or you're borrowing it from your primary residence. You could also do what's called a HELOC, which is a home equity line of credit. So you could do it that way, but you basically need your down payment of 20%. So that is number 1. Number 2, you need to identify what type of rental property you're going to buy, because there's so many different kinds. You could buy an apartment building, you could buy a fourplex, you could buy a commercial building. How I got started was I actually bought a duplex. So in order to stay within the 20% down payment, you would need to buy what's called a residential rental property, which consists of 4 units or less. Anything that's 5 units or more is considered commercial, and that's a whole different ballgame, and I'm not going to get into that because that's not a good starter rental property. So 4 units or less. So you've got a duplex, you've got a triplex, you've got a fourplex, or you could buy a single family dwelling for your rental property. What I recommend, and this is just from my personal experience, so I would suggest to buy a duplex. And the reason why I suggest that is because if you have 2 units, you could live in 1 unit and rent out the other unit. Or if you have 2 units, if one person moves out, then you're going to have the other person in there that's most likely going to carry most of the mortgage. Now, years ago, when I first started buying rentals, I would have, let's just say, for example, I was getting $1,000 rental income for 2 units, 500 and 500. Then my mortgage payment was just under 500, including expenses and everything. So if one person moved out, I always had the second person that was able to pay all of the expenses. In today's economy, in today's market, that doesn't really happen that much anymore. But like I said, the 2 units I feel is the best, because then if one person moves out, you got the other. When I bought my very first property back in 1998, I did buy a duplex, and my husband and I at the time ended up moving into it, and it was such a great learning experience. And we had the guy that was living upstairs, we assumed his tenancy, and he lived up there, and he paid the rent, which pretty much paid for our mortgage and then some. Mind you, we did have to evict him later on, years later, but that'll be for another video. But anyway, so that would be my suggestion, would be to number 2 is identify what type of property you want to have, because you need to know what type you're going to be looking for, because when you start doing your searches, you want to kind of zero in on whether it's duplexes or triplexes or single family dwellings. All right. So number 3 is talk to your bank or mortgage agent to kind of get an idea of if you can qualify. Now, it's really hard because the lenders won't give you a pre-approval based on your numbers and other criteria, because they have to see the property. But just so that you're not wasting anybody's time, if you have a good banker, if you have a good mortgage agent, they'll be able to give you an indication on, yes, you can probably get something around this price range. They should be able to help you with that. So just talk to your lender and get an idea of, because you could be way off. They could say, hey, you know what? Your credit score is way too low, but you qualify financially and everything else looks good, but your credit score is like 602 and you really need to work on that. And so if you have a good lender, they'll guide you in the right direction and then you can work on that. Number 4, once you've talked to your banker and you know you're good to go, then start hunting. Start looking for that property type that you are interested in. Narrow it down. So if you go on to MLS.ca, if you're in Canada, then you can zero in on if you're looking for multifamily, and then you can zero in on duplex. And so when you're hunting, you've got to know the numbers of the property. And the more properties you look at, the better. So I remember watching a video on, I can't remember who it was, but it was a property investor. And they said that they look at least 100 properties before they pull the trigger. I've probably looked at, I don't even know how many properties I've looked at. Definitely thousands of properties. Like I am constantly looking at properties. I may go like a month without looking at properties if I'm not in the market to buy, but then I get back into it again. And even if I'm not in the market to buy a rental or a primary residence, I have my hands in there because I need to know what's going on, because that's just what interests me, and because you never know when you find that next deal. When you're hunting for your property, you have to calculate the numbers. So first, what you need to do is you need to calculate the rental income. So if they put it in there, figure out the rental income. Sometimes the realtors do, sometimes they don't. If they don't put it in, you can ask them for the rent roll, because you got to know how much money they're bringing in. Then you need to figure out the mortgage payment, okay? And then you need to figure out the expenses. And then after that, I always deduct 20% for extras, for I don't even know that was there, right? So there's 4 things within number 4. Again, I'm going to repeat them. You need to know how much rental income the property is bringing in. You need to know the mortgage payment. So you have to calculate the mortgage payment, which should include the interest. And you should also get the property taxes as well. And if there's condo fees, if you're purchasing a condo fee, you'll have to also include that in there as well. Okay. Now the bank only takes 50% of the condo fee to qualify you for the mortgage, but you should put in the whole amount. Okay. Mortgage payment, expenses. So if you have to pay for grass cutting, all that sort of stuff, get that in there. And then minus the 20% for an extra amount, because you know what? There's always cost overruns. Number 5, put an offer in conditional on financing, conditional on getting property insurance. And you can put a third condition if you want, depending on what market you're in. If you're in a buyer's market, you can do that, put a whole bunch of conditions. If you're in a seller's market, guess what? You're not going to be able to put a whole bunch of conditions on, because, during COVID, when we had a seller's market, I saw people buying houses without the financing condition. Not something I would ever do. However, when you're in a seller's market, you got to make deals happen, right? So put an offer in conditional on whatever you want it to be. Your realtor will put in the standard clauses, the standard conditions that are in there for every property purchase, but you can also add 1 or 2 in there. Okay. So those are the 5 steps how to buy your first rental property. However, I said that I had a bonus tip for you at the end, and I'm going to give it to you now. If you're going to buy a rental property in Canada and it's your first rental property, so let's say, for example, you already own a property. What you could do is you could rent out property number 1, okay? Now you would have to show the bank that you already have a lease coming up and you've got people that are committed that are moving into your place. And then the next property, which is going to be your rental, if you move into that duplex, guess what? You only need 5% down. You don't need 20% down. And so a lot of people will utilize this strategy, and I actually utilized this strategy when I lived up north and I was buying a whole bunch of rental properties. If you buy a duplex and move into it, you only have to put down 5%. If you buy a triplex or fourplex and you move into it, you only have to put down 10%. If you buy a single family dwelling, right, where there's only one unit, and you move into that and you've rented out your first property, you also only need 5% down. So I hope that helps. Hit the like and subscribe so that you get notified every time I upload a video. And feel free to comment if you have any questions, concerns, or if you're ready to buy your first rental property. We'll see you in the next video.